So he probably would say it in a demeaning way, but at the same time, he's like, "Hey, you're looking like a weak little bitch in front of the Mexicans. Don't do it."
Did you see that? I believe it was maybe like a year or a year and a half after the movie came out, Tarantino released a novelized version of the movie. Like you can buy the book. You read it?
I did.
And what's the because just from my perspective, there was a part of me where I loved the movie so much where I almost didn't want the kind of it. I didn't want some fan fiction from QT that would almost like tarnish. I didn't want to go too deep, if you know what I mean. And then, to be honest, there was also probably because I was going through the throes of trying to promote my own book and the frustration that comes with that. And I was like, fuck Quentin Tarantino. I'm not giving him any more, not so much the money. It was more like the time. I'll put sure. Time into reading something with less publicity. But what was your thoughts on the book?
To me, it was more a curiosity that he had written a book because he's such a prolific writer and he's a great director, but he's known for his dialogue, for his writing. And I would much more have preferred to see him write a completely unique work in the form of literature, but I was still really curious to see what it would look like in book form. And it is a different beast. It's not just a carbon copy of the script. I will say the movie is the definitive version because the book, it's almost like he doesn't give a fuck. It's him at his most indulgent, which is good and bad. Because some parts are borderline unreadable, some parts are fascinating, and it is his voice. You would never mistake it for anyone else's voice. The Brad Pitt character in the book is a testament to how important the actor is. Because in the book, he's just not likable. He's a like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. He's not a nice guy. He's not a good guy. He's a piece of shit. He's a pervert. He's a racist. He's a wife killer. And Brad Pitt can be all those things, but by being so handsome and charming, get you to like him.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought up the novel because, in the movie, that awesome scene where his wife is being an annoying cunt on the boat, and you see him grab the, what is it? We call it a gidgee in Australia, like it's the what's it called? The gun that you kill fish with under the water, right?
Like the harpoon torpedo?
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Not torpedo, harpoon, a spear gun, something like that.
Yeah, spear gun, yeah. And he's kind of, you see him, just that awesome moment where he's like considering what should he do. But then I listened to a podcast where Quentin Tarantino kind of hinted that, you kind of learn more about what actually happened. And, it raised the question of like, do I want to know that, or is it better kind of knowing that watching the movie is cool because just from the way he behaves and how reckless and how much of a kind of a wild man he is, you kind of know that he does it, but you also want to like him because, as you say, he's Brad Pitt, and you want to take acid with him and be like, whoa, are you real? All that stuff. Exactly. Like he seems like the perfect guy to trip with, and he's got his dog there if any shit goes down. So you want to think that he's a nice guy, but then you also kind of know, he's probably killed some people.
And also that the ending, which is one of the more memorable parts of the movie, is a throwaway line just kind of mentioned in passing about 40 pages into the book. So Tarantino's just like, it was a big reveal in the movie, but in the book, fuck it, doesn't matter. Like, I forget what the finale in the book even is, but a good portion of the book is the fictional Cowboy Show that Leonardo DiCaprio is acting in. And that's just like the book becomes that. And it's like, all right, I guess this is what it is now. I can only assume he got super coked out of his mind, wrote this book in like a night.
Yeah.
No publisher is going to say, Tarantino, like, we don't really want to take your manuscript. Like, we're looking for something. They're going to take it. It'd be like Tarantino's first novel.
I like the fact that he has just kind of meandered into weird parts of the subplots of the movie, because if it had just been a extrapolation or kind of like scene by scene, recounting what happened within the movie, but with maybe a tiny bit of extra detail. That would have been a pretty frustrating read. So it sounds, yeah, like you said, totally on brand for Tarantino. And I think that's what he always said, is that like he's going to do his 10 movies and then go and write books. So I hope he fucking does that. I'll be the first in line to buy whatever he, like if it's a new universe. And it's really clever on his behalf, because I think there's nothing like a false retirement for someone in showbiz to drum up interest for your final projects as callous. And then also, if he writes a book, then people are going to be like, oh, you're going to adapt your book? Like, people, it's kind of clever, because then he just gives himself the perfect way to drum up interest for him to get back into filmmaking. So, yeah.
As sad as I am to see him go, I hope he does stick to his guns and stops after 10 movies, because so many directors just don't, because it's an ego thing, or they're afraid if they stop working, they'll die. Like, I don't know if you're a fan of Ridley Scott's movies. He's made some of the best movies ever made, but dude's like 90, and he just cranks out garbage, like 3 movies, 4 movies a year, that I don't even know if he's consciously making. They probably just prop him in the director's chair, attach his name to it, and then a bunch of second unit directors put these movies together. It's just no one's allowed to retire gracefully. But imagine you make 10 of the best movies ever made, fuck off, and you're known for not having made a bad movie.
I was always a little disappointed by Tarantino's commitment to just make 10 movies, because I was like, I enjoy all your movies, some slightly more than others, but I was like, you don't have a style that is only going to be kind of like a young man's. He can kind of tell stories. He could tell like a young person's story. He could tell a middle-aged person's story. He could tell like old people. I think he's capable of doing it all. So initially, I was disappointed by that decision, but I recently tried to watch Wes Anderson's most recent movie, The French Dispatch, and I'm going to give it another go, because I was watching it on a plane. It's one of those situations where I knew I didn't have enough time to get through the entire movie before we landed, and so that might have influenced my kind of frustration with the movie. But Wes Anderson used to be one of those directors as well, where I was like, yeah, I fucking love all your shit. Keep cranking them out. I'd do this for the rest of your life. I'd much prefer there to be 20 Wes Anderson movies in the world as opposed to 10. But then with this one, I think I hit the wall. I was like, I believe I'm Wes Anderson out. Like he's doing his same thing again. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize, but there was a glass ceiling on my ability to appreciate his movies. And so I wonder, bringing it back to Tarantino, if he's kind of aware of that, whether people, there's like a certain, you've got like 20 hours, 25 hours with an audience, and that's all you can kind of grab them before you start recycling stuff blatantly, and you just run out of steam. So maybe that's why he decided to instill that 10 movie parameters.
And with Wes Anderson in particular, I checked out even earlier. The Grand Budapest Hotel, which is like his biggest movie. On paper, it's everything you want from a Wes Anderson movie. And maybe if I hadn't seen his previous dozen movies, I wouldn't mind. But at a certain point, it's just like, I'm kind of getting sick. Like, Wes Anderson has become too Wes Anderson. And it's almost like someone put all the ingredients in a computer algorithm and said, make a Wes Anderson movie. It's quirky. It's got like the symmetrical camera shots. Everyone's a little wearing some silly little outfit.
Yeah.
Bill Murray shows up, or Jeff Goldblum. You know, all the ingredients are there. And Tarantino, I bet if he made 11 movies, his 11th movie would be a great movie. And even his 12th movie. However, I feel like there's always the threat of diminishing returns. And he might be the exception, but I like that he, if he does it, has the discipline to say 10. Because you know, in his head, he'll probably have an idea for a phenomenal movie. But he's like, well, I made 10. Can't do it.
Yeah. Well, kind of like easing our way into this week's topic, that you kind of ran aground in terms of trying to figure out a concept here. So before we kind of get into the topic, inside baseball of like idea generation, how do you decide whether something is a good idea or not, or like whether you want to write about it? Because this is something I've been thinking more about recently in terms of you're only alive if you're lucky for 90 years. You've got to pick your spots in terms of what you decide to write, when you decide to write it, and how do you decide what's a good idea and what's a bad idea in terms of something to pursue, or whether it be to discuss on a podcast or to try and write a fucking short story or a book or something?
It's one of those things where the more I actively try to do it, it just won't come. It has to hit me in a completely unrelated moment, like at work or going on the metro or talking with friends, and suddenly a sound or a quote or just an image will remind me of something, and like, oh shit, where's my pen? I gotta write that down. And that could be something I'm writing myself, like a piece of fiction, or something for this podcast, something that I think is worthwhile. Because good lord, it's not like we're desperate for topics. We have internet at our disposal. Like, just go on Google and type the letter A and just see what comes up. But it's like, if I'm not passionate about it, I don't want to talk about it. Like, I want to fake my way through it. If it's not interesting to me, I don't want to bore the listeners with it. How about you?
Well, yeah, I kind of agree with that, because like with big projects or something it could even be like a scene or something in a novel. It doesn't have to be like the whole grand premise of the novel, but if it's going to be something that I'm passionate about, and I know I need to spend tons of hours figuring out, I need to be really passionate about. But then I've also kind of recently tried to be more understanding, or tried to kind of like goad the idea out of the hole like it's a fucking little weasel or something hiding in there, and it pokes its head out. It grabs your attention for a second, and then it hides away. And I was listening to a podcast with Judd Apatow and two comedians, Mark Norman and Sam Morrill, and they said that they wrote in the early days of stand-up, and I believe they still do, they used to bounce bits off each other. And Morrill paid Norman a compliment. He said that Norman was always very good at if an idea sucked, he didn't say it sucked. He basically said, "Oh, there's something in that. There's a reason why you want to. There's a reason you thought of this originally, and it might not be the actual topic itself. It could be just tangentially related to it." And so I think that that's interesting. It's kind of like it's putting a lot of faith in your subconscious almost, where it's like, this on face value is shit and uninteresting and will run out of ideas in 10 minutes. But through pulling it apart, you'll find, even if it's purely kind of solipsistic and you're kind of just existing within your own brain, there's a reason you've decided to fixate on this one thing, even momentarily, because it's a catalyst for something else that might be interesting. So I've been trying to do a bit more of that, because before I was a bit too dismissive of ideas that didn't fully grab me.
I think that's the right way to do it, because I have friends who are trying to get into writing, and they'll send me their work to take a look at. And like right off the bat, it might be a genre that I'm not familiar with, I don't read, and I'll let them know. But I think mean-spirited criticism doesn't do anyone any good. And even if you don't like it, it doesn't matter. There might be someone who likes it, but the point is, you're not trying to make them feel bad about themselves. You're trying to give them insight in the best version of whatever that is can be. So there's no like hard, fast rule to this, but for every critique I have, I try to say at least 3 nice things in its place. And it's not that hard. Like I feel like if you have to fish for nice things to say, you're a bad person. Like it is possible to say nice things, and they could rework it in such a way where they'll discover themselves something that they didn't initially know was there, and not necessarily to make it so you like it more, but just inadvertently they'll be like, oh, that like ignited something that I didn't see before, and they'll change it up. Yeah, sometimes it only takes like one small dash of salt to make something better.
I think this was something that Ricky Gervais and Sam Harris discussed on their little podcast together, where Ricky Gervais would be too afraid to give brutally honest feedback to a friend who kind of like shared a script with him or something, whereas Sam Harris like never lies, honesty above everything, kind of human PowerPoint presentation, as Hannibal Buress called him once upon a time. He's like, no, you got to tell people the truth and not bullshit them. And I kind of probably side more on the Gervais camp because he raised a good point, and something that I think about all the time, where you can have your honest appraisal of something where you read something, you're like, I think this sucks for reason X, Y, Z. But then to really come at someone strong and say, you should change this because of reason X, Y, Z, that's like assuming that you understand what the general populace will like, or like people outside. Yeah. Whereas I've been, look at movies that are popular. So there's some movies that people really like where I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't see what's people find interesting about this. So I think that's kind of a tricky thing about giving feedback or even just trying to appraise what is good, is kind of getting outside your own way and being like, well, do I just kind of like the same story told again and again with slightly different characters, and so therefore that's going to influence whatever feedback I give anyone about anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, this week's topic, I think we're doing a good job of just having meandering conversations for the first 20 minutes of each podcast, so that anyone who's like, get to the fucking topic is well and truly left by now. So yeah. That's partially my aim for these. I like catching up with David and kind of and shooting the shit, but the fact that we're potentially annoying people as well really kind of hits me in the sweet spot.
Well, give us one critique and 3 nice things to say about how we yeah. I'll take it into consideration.
All right, so for this week's topic, I wanted to I've always heard about the syndrome of, it's not a syndrome, but there is apparently there's something that happens where if you grow up with siblings, you have an inherent attraction to one another, but then there's also some like repellent thing that happens where if you're around each other, your biology kind of lets you know, no, you're closely related to that person, don't develop intimate sexual feelings for them. So hence you develop strong bonds with your sibling, but it never spills over. That's why the concept of anything intimate with your siblings to people who've grown up with their siblings makes you want to vomit, because it's like a physical reaction against that type of behavior, which is fucking clever. Good on you, Lord Jesus, for instilling that in humans. It's keeping us yeah, totally good move, keeping it, spreading the seed far and wide. But the issue is, if siblings have been separated at birth, like they've both been adopted, apparently when they meet each other later in life, they have all the attraction but without the repulsion. And so I just always found this like a fucking weird, icky concept, because you kind of know just through human history the amount of kind of like postman's children that would have existed, and people that don't realize they're siblings, and so I just googled this on a whim to see if there'd been any stories, and there's no names attached to this, understandably, but it's a story from The Guardian from a long time ago now, 2008. Twins separated at birth, married each other. So the article, twins separated at birth and adopted by separate parents, later married each other without realizing they were brother and sister. The siblings were recently granted an annulment in the High Court's family division. The judge ruled that the marriage had never validly existed. Marriages can be annulled if one of the parties was under 16 at the time, if it is a bigamous union, or if the couples are closely related. The identities of the British pair and the details of the relationship have been kept secret, but it is known that they were separated soon after birth and were never told that they were twins. They did not discover they were blood relatives until after the wedding. Fuck. The case was uncovered by Lord Alton in a conversation with a High Court judge. He used it to highlight perceived deficiencies in the human embryology and tissues bill going through Parliament. So, anyway, you get the idea. This is the fucking worst case scenario. If you think you found the love of your life, and it turns out it's not only a sibling, it's your fucking twin. Yeah, for me, this is the perfect fodder for a dark comedy. So what are you thinking, Davey?
This is my take. I don't like twins. I don't think anyone likes twins.
Yeah, they're freaky.
They're fucking weird. Like, even from childhood, whenever I had twins in my class, I didn't want to sit next to them. I didn't want to play with them at recess. Something about them really, really got under my skin. The fact that there's two of the same person and we're just supposed to do that. They're not charming. They're not cute, and how much they try to like say they have different personalities. No, they don't. So when I heard about the story, my initial reaction might not be what you think it is. Twins are already weird. Like, they're already like an abomination to God. Would it be so bad if they just stayed married?
Well, yeah, I had a lot of thoughts here. So yeah, I kind of agree with your take on twins in general. It is, if Jesus, our Lord Jesus, did a good job with repelling the siblings, he did a bad job with twins. It's confusing. It's confusing. It's hard to keep track of two people who look the same. And I remember growing up, my next door neighbors, or the kids over the road, they were two twins, and they were boys, and they had very different personalities, but they were identical and they looked the fucking same. And because I spent so much time with them, I was eventually able to tell them apart through like distinctive skin tags or something. Like, there's little tells, and it was mainly their personalities. You can kind of figure out who's who. And I noticed this strange thing because there was one who was like a hothead and the other one who was more sensitive. So they'd have they had a combustible relationship with one another. And because I spent so much time with them, I became, close to them both. But I noticed this strange thing where with the twin bond thing and the telepathy thing is fucking real. Because even though these people were very different, they had like undying loyalty to each other. So they'd bicker and stuff like that. And so you'd be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna try and console you because your brother just tried to put your head through a fence or something like that. And then they'd kind of not want your sympathy or emotional connection either, because it was like only really, especially with, I'm guessing in childhood, where it's like you against the world. It's not just you against the world. It's like me and my twin against the world. So that was an illuminating thing for me with twins, is that these kids were very different to one another. So if you had kind of like two twins that were both mild mannered, you'd have that connection, but like on a even higher degree, because you really do have kind of like you can kind of like send yourself on a reconnaissance mission to be like, all right, I'm going to stay here, you go over there, report back. It's like you can kind of live by proxy through someone else. It's fucking crazy. But yeah, and I just thought the kind of the weird the bickering, right? Like the way I imagine this adaptation of this film, initially when these two people meet, and the kind of like, the meet cute type of romantic comedy where people are kind of like annoyed at each other, but they're kind of like, it's their way of kind of like flirting with each other, like as if you'd flirt with a child, with another kid at school. Just the weird parallel of being like, Are they are they flirting with each other because they're in love, or is it just regular brother and sister type of shit?
Well, yeah, because they often say, uh, you see couples who look the same. Like you initially think they're brother and sister, and that, oh well, you're attracted to, like yourself, you're attracted to the familiarity of it. And in this case, like, is there that telepathy twin bullshit thing going on where, let's say, as an adult, you're in a cafe or a shopping center, and across the room you see a woman or man, and you think, okay, they look pretty good, but is there more going on biologically in that twin brain of yours that, oh, I
Yeah.
don't think they look good. Like, I'm not able to express it via language, but there's something about that person that, like a tractor beam, I'm drawn towards this person.
Yeah, that's a funny idea. You could maybe have, in the early phases of the movie where they're kind of getting to know each other, on paper, they're incredibly compatible with one another. And then you could maybe have the chick confiding in her best friend, having a coffee, being like, oh, there's something so dangerous about Scott. And she's like, what do you mean? You guys are perfect for each other. And she goes, I don't know. It just, there's something about it that feels wrong. Like she kind of senses the, she senses the danger aspect of it. But this all being said, I guess one thing I wanted to instill here is that, like, this, the one thing with this type of story, I think Hollywood always fucks this up. Because this is just like an outrageous story, and I just think it would be an amazing dark comedy, is if you just told it straight faced.
Mm-hmm.
You essentially you were basically like, okay, you had a situation where the guy has his parents, and he's under the impression that they're his biological parents. He gets together with this girl. They have all this kind of attraction, revulsion stuff, but she's always known she's adopted. And then and during the relationship, she eventually she gets like a bombshell of like, oh, I found out who my biological parents are. And then you could kind of have the funny, the weird moment where the adopted parents of the dude have this quandary of like, oh, she's having this moment of revelation, she's going to learn about her parents. They don't realize it's the same parents, biological parents either, but they just have to be like, oh, do we tell our son that he's adopted? They eventually relent and be like, well, it feels mean-spirited, even though he's like in his late 20s, we should finally let him know he's adopted. And then that's where it kind of like it fucking the grand revelation happens, is that it's the same biological parents. Because I think, and the one thing that the kind of genre here that I'd be thinking about is, I'm not sure how familiar you are with like the mumblecore genre that happened like 10 years ago. And I think that was
Sarah and
yeah, well, and I think Joe Swanberg, it was like what this Chicago-based director was like, he cranked out a ton of movies. And I found like the issue with those movies is that I guess the whole point was that they were like about nothing, and they were kind of the delivery of the actors, and it was all just very kind of like realistic situations. But I thought that for this type of movie, if you had such a fucking wild, strange sequence of events, but you told it in kind of like a mumblecore way, with just kind of like no crazy kind of dramatic music or nothing that kind of like tried to persuade the audience to feel one way or the other. You just kind of like very relatable, just made it kind of like it would make it almost more shocking, because you'd have the impression of being like privy to it, as if it was kind of a documentary unfolding to it. So that's kind of what I think.
You don't need to add shock value. The story's shocking enough, and that always cheapens it and shows you don't have faith in the project when you're like, well, we need to add this, or what if it turns out he's a robot? It's like, no, just like it's enough. And I was thinking actually, how fucked would it be if both sets of parents were the ones who actually found out, and then the dilemma is them deciding when and how they're gonna tell their kids.
Yeah, that's funny. You see them like mouth kissing at Christmas dinner after they've had too many red wines and they're feeling merry, and you're like, oh my god, what is going to happen here? Yeah, and I was and also the other kind of it's weird here because like with this actual story you don't know the specifics, but imagine if they already had children.
Oh god.
Yeah, so that was the other situation is
Imagine
that
if
I
they
was
had
thinking.
twins.
Yeah, yes. Yes, that's it. Because aren't twins more likely to have twins as well? So,
I think so. And what I was thinking in this situation, time heals all wounds, but there's some things you just don't bounce back from. Like
no.
there's some things that you could brush your teeth and rinse your mouth out and take a couple showers, but there's some things that don't rinse off. Do you think they ever contemplated getting hypnotized to forget that information? It's just like, hey, let's just remain married. Like, let's get hypnotized, forget this ever fucking happened, and stay married and hope it works.
Yeah, that would work if in the plot they were the only ones who found out. It was like the revelation happened when the dude figured out he was adopted as well, and then did his own research, and then they kind of like, yeah. So if it was their little secret, yeah, you could imagine them exploring different avenues, but yeah, and then I think it's kind of like this yeah, you could have some really kind of disturbing moments as well where they realize, no, this is wrong. We have to end this, and they go to proceed to start getting separated and divorced, but they're still attracted to one another, so they have kind of like some like some the last like, no, we can't tell anyone about this didn't happen, the stories of like priests and altar boys and stuff like that, and how I think Louis CK did this whole bit about how like with pedophiles, could you imagine how good that must be for them if they risk
Yeah, it's like, why
if
are you
they
gonna
risk
risk
it all?
it?
Yeah,
It
so
must be amazing if you're gonna keep doing it.
you could, in a weird way, it's disturbing and it's disgusting, but in a weird way, it would be heartbreaking as well to see someone be like, oh, this is kind of like the person that I love the most, but then I have to kind of do this, and then separate. And so yeah, I think that's how I'd want to play this story, is that rather than make it like involve the authorities and the media, and then because the movie would get so big, it would be interesting to kind of like just make it about the dynamic of the twins themselves having to figure out how do we raise our kid together now, and also just the strange kind of like the fracturing of the family that would occur, like the divorce, and then kind of like who takes the kids, those twins being confused, being like, I thought you guys had a good relationship. It's like
Right.
there's so many prime opportunities to kind of like and just the pure transition of like, yeah, we used to be husband and wife, but now we're like siblings. And in a weird way, if you were going to raise kids, it would be, your sibling, you the same age, the exact same age. You've got the same brain, pretty much. Like you're going to be on this. You're probably going to be pretty good co-parents.
Well, I was thinking, how do you even like just look at your mates ever again? Like, what, it's always on their mind. It's always on your mind, and it's one of those things where there's not like a single clean way to deal with it. Because it's like, well, it's my sister. She's my family. Do we a just pretend we don't exist in their eyes, like she doesn't exist, I don't exist, or B, try to be siblings and forget we used to bang? Or do you think there's even a moment, I'm not doing the letter system anymore, do you think after they found out, like, well, obviously this has to end, we're getting divorced, one last time, for old time's sake, and then we'll never do it again? I mean, the deed's already done. It's not
Yeah.
like, oh, things are weird now. It's like, no, they've been weird.
Yeah, they've been weird. Yeah, it's just so many fucking opportunities. Like you've got the dude has like a friend where he's always sensed that his buddy has been into his wife. Then he has to have this enforced divorce, and then his like Lothario buddy sniffs an opportunity to, now that they're recently divorced, and the dude's like, yeah, that's my ex-wife and my fucking sister. So it's like it's double reason to keep his kind of trouser snake friend away from her.
Do you because the story like deliberately doesn't reveal their names, we don't see what they look like, which I kind of like, because you mentioned you don't want this movie to be about the media frenzy. It's very intimate. It's about these two people, and by proxy, their friends and family. So who do you see playing them, or what type of person do you see playing them?
Yeah, this is one of those instances where, and maybe it's just a lack of imagination on my behalf, so I'd be curious to get your thoughts. But yeah, I thought about those mumblecore movies. I only watched a few of them. The one that I remember that I enjoyed was this one called White Reindeer, where Joe Swanberg is an actor in it, but he doesn't direct it. Some other guy directs it. And that movie's about a woman whose partner dies, and she thinks he's like the greatest guy, but she later finds out that he was having a ton of affairs. It was kind of a piece of shit, and it's about her grief. So that was a really good movie, and there were very few recognizable actors in that movie. So yeah, it kind of, you do get a false sense of intimacy and it's just more positioned in an actual time and place. When you have like actors it's not kind of like amateurish, documentary-esque. It's not like The Office or something like that, but it's more a case of like, oh, I'm not distracted by the fact it's Bryan Cranston playing the adopted parent. So I don't know. That's what I was thinking, is that it would be kind of an unknown cast, and just kind of the mumblecore aesthetic would be useful for it. Actually, there's one actress who I think would be good. Her name's Rachel Sennett. I think she's this hot new, like, I think it's just because I'm crushing on her personally. That's why I'm thinking of her. But she's in this movie called. Mate. Yeah, mate. Perhaps she's got brown hair and Irish background, so we could be related somewhere down the line. But yeah, she's in this movie called Shiva Baby, where she looks Jewish actually, but she's Irish Catholic, and yeah, she's kind of like a comedian actress in a bunch of different movies and TV shows now. And she was in that show High Maintenance. Anyway, she's kind of got like a attractive, neurotic energy. So she's one actress, right? She could perhaps play the twin.
I'm looking her up right now. She looks very familiar. Definitely could pass for Jew. Interesting. So in my version of this movie, you could call it stunt casting, but this is one person who's played a set of twins already. And
Armie Hammer?
No, I was thinking Chris Lilly.
That is fucking hilarious. No, you'd maybe have to have Chris Lilly as involved in some way. I don't think I could buy Chris Lilly as being the main dude in this. That would be so hard to keep it. Like, it would just be on a meta level, fucking hilarious seeing Chris Lilly trying to straight play this with a straight face.
Again, this is why I'll never be in charge of anything, because even my own work, I can't not turn it into pure schlock. Like, you could give me $1 million idea and say, like, I want to make like a fucking Daniel Day-Lewis, like, Oscar caliber level performance of a movie. It's like, nah, fuck Daniel Day-Lewis, put Chris Lilly in it, and he's gonna play every character. He's gonna be in blackface and Asian face and Jew face and just what have you. And that's why this is just a podcast, and the Steven Spielbergs of the world are the one making the big money.
What are your thoughts on when non-American actors attempt an American accent for a movie?
Some of them are quite good at it, more often than not. A British actor, and to a certain extent Australian actors, are much better at doing an American accent than vice versa. And it has nothing to do with the quality of the actor. I think what I've noticed is when an American actor attempts a British accent, it doesn't geographically make sense. Like, some of the pronunciation is fine, but there's always like just a wrong mixture in there. There's like some Cockney in there, but then there's a bit of a northern accent, and then there's a bit of the Queen's English. And it's like each word you're saying fine, but these don't mix. All over the place. Whereas a lot of times it depends on the actor. Like Humberto Cabbage Patch, when he does an American accent, Benedict what's his name?
Benedict Cumberbatch. Is that it?
Cumberbatch.
I liked what you said. That was fucking the LSD version of him.
But when he does an American accent, it sounds like, do you remember in Die Hard when Hans Gruber is pretending to be American?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God you found me. I think the terrorists are over there. It's like, oh, this is fucking weird.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, they do a decent enough job.
Yeah, there are some, there was this ad I saw recently for, and it's an Australian book from a while ago called Shantaram. I think that's how you pronounce it. About an ex-convict who goes to India and, gets involved in shady shit over there, and then becomes enlightened or whatever. And they cast, it's like an Apple TV series, I assume, like a 6 episode type of limited series. And they cast the guy from Sons of Anarchy, the British actor, the Charlie, the blonde guy.
The guy who's kind of not a very good actor, but he's okay in some roles. Yeah. Yeah,
and so anyway, maybe it's just because I am Australian and now I live in the States, so I like to think I've got a good idea of and my parents are British as well, so I've got it all. I know what accents are meant to sound like. I was watching Shantaram, and it's a British guy trying to be an Australian ex-convict, and it's exactly what you said, where the mix is I wouldn't even say he's in the ballpark. It's a bad accent. He doesn't do a good job. And I was like wondering, I was like, okay, surely I'm not the only one noticing this, right? There are lots of intelligent people in the film industry and who have spent some time in England and Australia and know the difference and what's authentic and what isn't. But what I was thinking about is like, do people give a shit? Like, I give a shit because I was like, it looks like a terrible adaptation for other reasons apart from his accent. But I was like, even if the other parts looked really good and his accent was the only thing that took me out of it, that would be enough for me to be like, no, I'm not watching this. I can't buy
What's
in.
weird, it's not like the film industry is hurting for like young Australian talent. They're fucking everywhere. And for example, uh, interesting to no one, but like HBO, Band of Brothers, one of my favorite series. It's an American story about American soldiers, but you look at the IMDb cast, something like 90% of the actors are British. But that's not because it's like, oh, like we have a quota for British actors. It's like, no, they filmed in the UK. It just kind of makes sense, and they did a good job. And then Band of Brothers companion series, The Pacific, again, it's an American story about American soldiers, but they filmed it in Australia. So, like, by virtue of that, a good portion of the actors playing Americans are Australian, and it works. But with this story, which is like an Australian story, there's plenty of Australian actors, and you cast. Maybe he was cheap. Like, maybe that's
Yeah.
it. Maybe he was fucking cheap.
Well, that it got me thinking of two things. I thought maybe for a lot of people, film and TV, it's more about the visual. It's like literally about the still of like how this guy looks when he's with his love interest in his Indian apartment and they're smoking a joint and like hatching a plan. Like just that literal moment, like the still is going to be what's going to sell the TV show or movie to a lot of people. And then when they're watching it, does the audience? I think I have more sensitivity towards it to a lot of people because, yeah, like I said, it would take me out of it. Maybe a lot of people don't care if it's targeted towards an American audience. They're like, well, the everyone thinks I'm British over here, or my accent. No one says Australia. They can't pick my fucking accent. So maybe it doesn't matter. And then also just kind of the weird business of Hollywood where it's like that maybe his agent got him the job, and it's like because he'd been in Sons of Anarchy and all this other stuff. It's like, well, of course we'll take him because his agent is like, no, you. It's almost like a done deal type of situation. It has to be him. As long as an actor won't ruin a production, it doesn't matter if they take it down by a few percent. It's like, yeah, that'll do. So I think that's why filmmakers like Tarantino or Wes Anderson are so cool because you can tell they get the right person for their roles and are uncompromising about it, as opposed to just kind of lowest common denominator. Let's get whoever for the part.
So, did you ever watch Game of Thrones when it was on?
No, I got. If you recall, remember in the last few episodes of Game of Thrones where there was all the controversy about how terrible. I'd actively avoided Game of Thrones until the very end, where it was so overbearing the conversation about it. I just did one of those YouTube videos like explain Game of Thrones to me in 5 minutes because I knew I'd never watch it. So I've got a gist of the arc of the whole series, but I never watched it.
Okay, I mean, in short, most of the main cast, it's a fantasy show, but for all intents and purposes, it's Europe, and all the characters who are from fantasy Europe, they have a British accent. And then there's the exotic Easterners, which is an inconsistent mix of like Italian, Greek, Russian, Arabic accents. It doesn't matter. It's fantasy. All that signifies is they're not from like the land that we mostly follow in this show. That's fine. It doesn't have to be consistent. But like thinking of accents and like how shitty does an actor have to be before a movie's like, oh, this is actively bringing us down. So recently, there's the new Game of Thrones spin-off show, House of the Dragon, which is actually pretty good so far. I don't want to give up hope because Game of Thrones was terrible, but it's pretty good. But there's one actress who is British, and I think she's like white and maybe Asian, but she's a British actress. She's English. And the accent she's doing is so bafflingly bad. It's not even like a mysterious accent. It's a Jamaican accent, which I want to know why in this fantasy universe is there, one, a Jamaican accent, and two, like a white British woman doing it, and three, was that a conscious decision on the part of the director and the actress, like, hey, we want this character to like have a Jamaican adjacent accent, and it's not even just me. Like, I think even articles have been written about it, and it's fucking baffling. And my explanation is, she was around and she was willing to get her tits out. Who cares what her accent sounds like? And I think it's as simple as that.
Welcome to the house of the dragon, man.
Yeah,
Herb jar in the sky, man.
it's like, goddamn, I thought Tom Hanks' son got canceled, but I guess he's fucking thriving.
Jesus Christ, that's strange. Yeah, I saw some other controversy in about that show in terms of there being a black actress involved, and people saying like George R. Martin is clearly writing about the history of the British Isles, and therefore, even though it's fantasy, it should be kind of like believable in this realm. And I saw Bill Burr got in shit for the Mandalorian because he's got a Boston accent in space. And he was like, oh, so that took you out of it. It wasn't the monsters firing guns and stuff. It's like, yeah, but there is a, like, I'm not sure if you've been following the lambasting of the Lord of the Rings Amazons, just how atrocious that looks in terms of the production values and the promo and essentially everything about it. And yeah, it's a strange balance if you're going to make fantasy stuff, because yeah, on face value, it's fantasy and you have the luxury of being able to kind of choose your own adventure with the world building. But then you also have the most rabid, nerdy fans who care. Like, I give a shit about an Australian accent that's done poorly. Like, they care about, an orc is meant to be 8 foot, between 8 foot and 10 feet. That doesn't work out when this actor, they're fucking doing size comparisons based on
rules, man. What are rules?
Yeah, so there is an element of like trying to be generous here, is that like you don't, it's not necessarily someone who's a straight up bigot or racist being like, get a black person off the screen, but it's taking them out of it. I don't know. It gets very blurry in terms of that stuff, whether someone's dog whistling racist shit or they're literally like, no, I'm a fucking straight up nerd and this book is my Bible, essentially.
To me, and again, this is a cop-out answer, but if something's good, like, have a black Viking, a Mexican Viking, do whatever you want. If it's good, I think all's forgiven. I think these big studios, they're very smart. They use this as a way to deflect criticism, because they could just say, oh, if you criticize their show, you're racist. And I mean, they're kind of the ones who start it preemptively before anything even happens. I love Lord of the Rings. I love the books. I love the movies. I could care less if they cast a black person as an elf, whether like that's what Tolkien wanted or not. Like, dude, he was born in the 1800s. Like, yeah, he was as far from woke as you can get, and nor should you expect him to be. Having said that, that Amazon Prime show is like the perfect example of like Hollywood cynicism, of just greedy studios pouring an insane amount of money just for the intellectual property, but not actually having any connection or like love for the source material, just knowing they could mine it for all it's worth and butcher it, and the fans will hate it, but they're still gonna make money anyways. Like, that's what this Lord of the Rings series is. Apparently it cost $1 billion, the most expensive thing ever made, and I've never seen a better example of money burning on screen. That's all it is. It's horrendously dull, it's terribly written, it's poorly acted, it's not good, and the fact that there's like a black hobbit is the least of its problems.
And what about the kind of actual structure of the story? Is it essentially just retreading the ground that Peter Jackson did with his trilogy? Like, is there a Frodo and Samwise characters?
What's great about it? So they don't actually own the rights to the Lord of the Rings or any of Tolkien's work, with the exception at the end of Tolkien's last book, there's like 20 pages of appendices where he just like lists dates and a little bit of backstory, but it's nothing more than bullet points. It's just like 2,000 years ago before Lord of the Rings, like the dwarves are doing this, the elves are doing that, like this battle happened. It's not a novel, it's not literature. It's like the book version of a special feature on a DVD. That's all Amazon owns the rights to. So they're essentially making up their own story, but the extent of their imagination is so limited they can't. And so, like, it almost ends up being a remake of the Peter Jackson movies, just because they probably don't even realize it. But lines of dialogue are lifted, story beats are lifted, but done so much worse and like in a really boring fucking way. It's boring. It's atrociously dull.
What do you feel like the I can't. This is. I'm surprised this has taken us 11 episodes in for me to say this, but well, what are your thoughts on the modern state of cinema? Like, do you feel like it's a good time for movies, or yeah? What are your thoughts on how things are right now?
I think there will always be good movies,
Mm.
but I feel the same way about books too. It's much harder for them to get recognized. Like I'm certain there's at least one or two or 20 fucking amazing self-published books out there, but due to lack of finances, lack of marketing and promotion, most people will never see them, never hear about them. And movies, it's I guess a little easier to market. You could dump anything on Amazon. I don't know if you've ever gone like into the deep pages of Amazon.
Oh yeah.
The horror movie sections. It's great. There will always be good movies. I think what we're seeing though is the more expensive, like big budget Marvel movies and Star Wars movies get. How do I put it? We're losing like just like the mid-budget movie that doesn't exist anymore. It's like a super independent indie movie with a budget of like $10 and it was filmed in a day, or like a $9 billion Lord of the Rings. We're never gonna get like a medium budget like comedy. They don't even really make comedies anymore. Not really. Like a Jim Carrey vehicle that had an all-star cast and it was a funny movie and everyone went to go see it, or a Will Ferrell movie, or even like the Judd Apatow movies. They don't really do that anymore because they don't make money. It has to be a part of a franchise, an ongoing thing, a multiverse thing. That's like the big new thing now, the multiverse. Everything's connected. So I think movies are going to get more cynical, like even more so. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to be reboot after reboot after reboot. We're going to have, in the next 10 years, like a fifth Spider-Man and a actor, and like a ninth Spider-Man actor, a Batman actor. It's not going to stop.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not like I'm going to the movies, the actual cinema to watch any of that stuff, but I still find that it's kind of overbearing. But a recent palate cleanser for myself has been the it's kind of like the alternative streaming service, Mubi. It's called MUBI. And what's been good about that is that like you can find American movies on there as well, but it's kind of just like more art house, independent cinema. And it's the Netflix model where you've got everything in one space, so it's easy to find. You don't have to torrent shit and do all that jazz. But I have been wondering about why I've been enjoying it. There's the palate cleanser element because it's just being, even though I'm not going to go watch a Star Wars movie and an Avengers movie, you just kind of sense it's out there in the zeitgeist and it's oppressive, even from a distance. And so there's that element. But then there's also just this area where I'm confused about is like, am I giving this movie more credit than it deserves because it's foreign and it's subtitled? You know, like there's, I don't know, there's an element of almost like anthropological intrigue where you're like, oh, I watched this movie where it was just a really straight up and down outsider returns to a small town she grew up in, but set in Georgia, as in like the Russia, on the outskirts of Russia, Georgia. And it's a very simple story, but it held my attention because I was just kind of like, oh, all these their actors are so funny, like just the cultural quirks you're kind of on the lookout for, of like, I wonder what life in Georgia is like, as opposed to it's different with my culture. But then yeah, you're also like maybe giving it more of a chance than you would the exact same movie set in your own home country, because you've been told that story before a million times. So
I think that's okay though. Just by the mere fact that you're exposing yourself to that. I went through this phase a couple years ago where I would watch any movie set in Italy because I just like how Italy looks.
Yeah.
I would be watching bottom of the barrel garbage on Netflix, not a good movie in any language, but because it was in Italy, it had my attention, and I think it's fine. I think it's okay. And no, you're absolutely right. I think we do overstate the quality of the movie, but I'd rather watch generic bullshit that's still somewhat new to me than my own generic bullshit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I watched this movie on movie called Zero Fucks Given, and it was a French movie by well, I don't know, don't recall who directed it, but the lead chick was one of the girls in that lesbian movie, The Blue is the Warmest Color, the younger one in that movie, and she plays
I've definitely seen parts of that movie.
Yeah, I've seen about 13 minutes of that movie as well, and then yeah, I didn't catch the rest of it. But anyway, yeah, that was a really good movie because she plays like a flight attendant for like a budget airline in Europe, and she's just kind of like, you know, doing the same kind of like ferrying tourists from Liverpool down to Spain and then over to like Italy, and then just doing these same routes and kind of the modern wage slave type of thing where no prospects. And then the end of the movie, she just kind of like returns home. She's grieving her dead mother, and kind of a meandering movie, but it was cool because I was like, oh, I just don't, I don't come across many. This is a very real modern problem, or like a lot of people lead these lives, but you just don't see many people telling these stories in mainstream movies. So it was kind of like a nice palate cleanser.
Well, that's another thing. An American filmmaker directs porn, and it has no value. It's called trash. A Frenchman does it, and it wins the Palme d'Or. Like, people are praising it at Cannes, and what the fuck? I mean, I can't tell you how many. Well, yes, I've seen them, but how many French movies are essentially porn, but they have pretty good cinematography and they're French, and like people will write essays about them. It's like Blue's the Warmest Color. It's 3 hours long. Like, we all know why we watched it.
Yeah, it is intriguing. You know, I've just the French. It's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy that the world see French people as more erotic and in touch with their kind of lustful. It's not even necessarily always about sex either. It's about like food, travel. You know, like if everything is kind of like an extreme thing when it comes to French people. At least it appears that way. I remember I was in when I was living in Medellin, there was this, I always used to go to this bar, and there was like an outdoor seating area, and you kind of like get chatting to other random people. There was always tourists there. And there was this French girl there, and I think it was because like one of the dudes at the table was single, and we were trying to like pair him off with girls around us, and we were like, what about her? And the French girl was like, yes, she's good. She has a nice ass. And it was this thing where she was like appraising her. And I remember the way she said it, if another girl of another nationality had said that, I'd be like, oh, you're kind of bi-curious, or you're like, are you into her yourself or something like that? But because it came out of a French girl's mouth, it was almost like she was studying everyone's form, and like everyone had a piece of sexiness about them, and she was able to like, and I was thinking like, wow, that stereotype, no matter how woke the world gets, or how kind of like we deconstruct everything about our identities and we kind of all become individuals living online, that's something that until the day we die, French people will never live down, because they fully embrace that erotic persona, and it definitely comes out in the books people write, or French people write, and the movies they make and the music they make. It's all very erotic. Not complaining.
No, me neither.
All right. Well, yeah, it's late, so why don't we do the double episode next week? Let's call it a day. You started an hour later here, so yeah.